Greetings! On this week's episode, don't believe everything you think. Greetings, I am Tom Earl, and this is my year of balance. It's an honor and a pleasure and a joy to have you here with me today. I know you could be anywhere and that you chose to be here. I just appreciate that, so thank you. So often we go through our days or our lives and we don't really just take a moment to check in with ourselves, with our body, and just take a quick break. So many times I know we work right through our lunch break, or even when we get home, we just work on our second job. So whenever we can, just to take a couple second break to check in with ourselves. So let's take that opportunity to do that now. So what I'd like to invite you to do is breathe in deeply, and as you breathe in, think up, reach up, stretch up, anything you can do, and then when we breathe out, just let it go. Okay? Here we go. Breathe in and release. Now this next time when we breathe in, I want you to think of one positive word. For instance, my word is going to be happiness. Yours can be joy, love, courage. Think of one word, and as you breathe in, imagine that one word, let's say it's joy, that it's the color blue or the color purple, whatever color you want to imagine. Imagine it's all around you. It's all around you. And as you breathe in, imagine yourself breathing in that color of joy or that color of purple. Imagine breathing it in and it filling your mind, going into your bloodstream, filling your whole body, and then release. Okay? So go ahead, take a second to pick one word that you're going to breathe in and think of what color it'll be. So mine is going to be happiness. It's going to be blue. So I'm going to close my eyes and I'm envisioning blue all around me. Blue made of happiness. Ready? We're going to breathe in. Breathe in. Feel it filling you up. And breathe out. Let's do that one more time. Breathe in through your nose. And release. Yes, indeed. So what did that take? 2 minutes. 2-minute quick check-in with our body where we just aligned our mind, our breath, and our body. And we did it in a way that was intentional. And I don't know about you, but I feel a greater sense of peace. I feel a greater sense of centeredness. And we always start with getting in touch with our breath every episode, because if you're looking for a certain energy shift, let's say you're trying to get focused, or you want to get relaxed, or you want to get clarity, or you want to bring some happiness, a great way to get to that energy level is to align your breath with the energy level you're seeking. For instance, whenever I go into something where I want to have a lot of intensity, a lot of energy, a lot of passion, I breathe really deep and passionate, where I'm like, I'm what's that called? Exaggerating so you can get it, but I breathe that way. Or when I want to relax, it's more gentle. I'm more, breathing in gently and releasing. But you'll notice that your energy level, your emotions are often aligned with the way you're breathing. For instance, when we get fearful or we get angry, they get really shallow and rigid. So just touching base and thinking, what do I want to feel right now, and aligning our breath to that. It's a great way within a minute or two to just shift the energy level we're at. So, as I mentioned, this is my year of balance. And every episode, I'm asking myself, where can I invite balance into my life? Where in my life can I invite balance? And where I'm inviting balance on this episode is my thinking. And specifically, the idea, you might have seen this bumper sticker of, don't believe everything you think. I used to see that. I remember the first time I saw it was around 2007. And It took from then until now for me to really get what that means. So before we go there, I want to tell you a little story. So when I first moved to Florida, I had moved there from the great state of Wisconsin. And as you may or may not know, Wisconsin has some beautiful lakes, but it does not have an ocean. And so when I got to Florida, I made the decision that I was going to go to the ocean every single week for the first 3 months I was there, just to experience it and be a part of that awesomeness. I mean, think about it. Our world is covered by what, 3/4 ocean? Or they say 3/4 water. Interesting fact, our body is made of 3/4 water, right? Interesting right there. And so before I went to the ocean, I am a researcher, so I tried to find, well, what are some things to know? For instance, where I was in the Tampa Bay area of Florida, they have a lot of stingrays. So I didn't want to just go running in there getting bit, or stung by a stingray. So I was looking online and learned that with stingrays, places where there's stingrays, you're supposed to shuffle your feet so that you don't step on a stingray. Instead, when you shuffle your feet, it sends vibrations through the sand and then the stingrays get out of there. There was this other thing I learned called riptide. Not sure if you're familiar with this, but riptide is where there is a current that's usually in some place that starts off shallow, like a sandbar or when you're getting into the water. And a riptide is currents, or the water starts to flow out towards the ocean, away from the shore, perpendicular to the shore, straight out into the ocean. And it usually takes you by surprise. You don't realize what's happening until you're in it. And so what happens is you're swimming, you're just doing your thing, and then all of a sudden you feel your body being pulled by a strong current further and further into the open ocean, which to our survival mind means danger, further and further into danger. And so our natural tendency in moments like that is to try to turn around and swim back towards the shore. Now the problem with that, I learned, is that most of us are not strong enough swimmers to go against the current pushing us out to sea. So what happens is people try to swim and swim and swim, and they try to go against the current, and what happens is you lose your momentum, you lose your energy, and unfortunately people drown this way, or if you're fortunately rescued in time. And so they say that rather than turning around and trying to go against the current and back to shore, what you should do is let the current push you towards out to sea and try to go to the side. Try to escape the current, not by going against it, but by letting it carry you and then moving slowly to the side of the current until you get out of it. And so, I know it's a good safety lesson, but I really thought this is a great metaphor for what we're going to talk about today with not believing everything we think. And so, as always, you can either be listening to this at tommerl.com/think, THINK, or you can watch the video at tommerl.com/THINK. Same content, different experience. So for those watching and for those listening, I'll explain it. But I have a nice little picture here that shows what a riptide looks like. And so it's this area in the middle of the ocean where it just starts pushing all of the currents out into the sea. And so if you think of that riptide as our streams of thought, our streams of consciousness, you think of our thoughts that sometimes, usually when we're stressed or when we're afraid or where it's an intense moment, our mind just kicks in and with this crazy energy starts pushing us towards a certain direction. For instance, have you ever stubbed your toe and instantly your mind takes over and you start yelling curse words, right? Or somebody cuts you off and your mind just takes over and you start screaming out the window, right? Those moments where the currents of our mind just start pushing us. And I talked about moments just right there where they were quick times. You stub your toe, somebody cuts you off. But there's other times where you get a phone call and you find out there's been a problem, something happened. And there's nothing you can do about it now. For instance, I was in New York, which is an amazing trip, and I was about to take off. My flight was just about to go off, and there where they say, put your phone on airplane mode. And so I was going to put my phone on airplane mode, and I saw a text where I saw one of my coworkers said, "We have an emergency. Here's the emergency. What can we do?" And I had a text, "I'm getting on the plane. There's nothing I can do. I'll call you when I land." So I had 6 hours to think about this problem. And the current of my mind was pushing me further and further into danger, into thinking, well, what if this happens? Well, what if that happens? Well, what if this doesn't work out? And then I'll be homeless, and then this, and then I won't have any, and I'll be starving. You know, your mind pushes us towards those dangers. And what I used to try to do was like the swimmer. I used to try to go against the stream of my thoughts and force those thoughts down. I used to try to turn around and say, no, and try to go against that current. And it doesn't work, and it takes a lot of energy. So instead of trying to force the thoughts to stop, it helps to get out of that stream, and rather than swimming against the current, become the observer of the thought. So if you check out my beautiful picture, I have the thoughts pushing us out into danger. And I have arrows pointing to the side of, instead of trying to stop the thoughts, get out of that stream and become the observer. And that's what I did on that flight. I got out of that stream and I just started to observe what I was thinking without judgment, without trying to stop it, without trying to, say this is stupid. I just started to observe what were some thoughts that were coming up. And when you do that, you can start to see that oftentimes our mind goes on a loop and a loop. And it usually leads to something that has to do with scarcity, I won't have enough, or nobody will like me, or I'll get physically hurt. And you can see the pattern that happens with your mind. And once you become the observer, you remove yourself from it. And instead of identifying with the thought, instead of a thought coming in and us automatically assuming that that thought is me, that I am it, instead of assuming that, when you remove yourself as the observer, you're now able to decide, do I want to believe this thought going through my mind or not? And so that's the first step. Become the observer. When we have our thoughts, if we want to make sure that we're not believing everything we think. And we've done this before. Have you ever had a time where somebody upsets you and you thought, I just want to strangle this person? And thank God you didn't, or you'd be listening to this from prison, right? So there are times where we know a thought will come into our mind and it's so crazy, we know that we don't believe it. We know that it's just a thought that comes into our mind. And so think back, when was a recent time where you had a thought come into your mind and you knew it was crazy, and so you chose not to identify with it? So these happen to us, but there's also times where thoughts come into our mind and we're so used to them coming in that we've identified with them and we've taken them on as who we are. So we're now letting the thoughts, we're now letting our mind automatically dictate not only who I am, but my emotions and my actions. And so what we want to work towards is 3 steps. One is when we start having these thoughts that are like the riptide, this current that's pushing me towards a direction I don't want to go. First thing to do is become the observer. So rather than trying to stop the thoughts, just step out of them and observe them in a neutral place. Second thing we want to do is to break that cycle. And so first, before we can break the cycle, we can break the pattern, we need to know what we're observing. And so I want to talk to you about 3 different types of thoughts that all of us seem to have, that repetitively go through our mind. And being able to identify them, being able to have a name for them, makes it much easier to observe. So one of the first classes of thoughts, or categories, or buckets, baskets of thoughts that we all have, are survival thoughts. Okay? So all of us, we have this tool in our body called the mind that is millions of years old, and it was formed through evolution. A lot of the characteristics of survival thoughts served us very well when we were first forming as a species. When we were living in caves, or we were surviving out in the open, only being able to survive with our hands and a rock, right? So back then, fight or flight was an excellent response mechanism, because If a lion was coming, you needed to react by literally either fighting or running for your life, literally. Or things like something that's different when you're surviving with just your hands and a rock in your mind. Things that are different, triggering a fight or flight response, that's totally appropriate. Because something different in your environment could mean a lot of different things when we were first forming as a species. But now, fight or flight does not serve us all the time. For instance, when we are on social media and you're being really vulnerable and you post something, you share something, and then somebody comments and says, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Our mind still goes into that fight or flight of either I'm going to retreat and never share again, or I'm going to let this person have it. So a lot of times, our thoughts are still these survival thoughts, and they usually revolve around thoughts that are scarcity or thoughts that we don't have enough. Okay, for instance, here's one of my survival thoughts is that if I do this thing, then I'll probably run out of all that I need to survive as a human being. And so these type of thoughts is not always said in that exact same way, but maybe it's something like, I could record this podcast or this video, but what if I do and nobody likes it? And then what if nobody likes it and I find out that none of this makes sense and I've been trying to share this message for the past, 10 years, and it turns out that I'm wrong, and because I'm wrong, I end up homeless on the street, and then I end up with no food, and eventually I die from hunger, right? So clearly I'm exaggerating, but we have these type of thoughts come through our mind often, and they come from this right here, these survival thoughts. Because if we were in a room full of people and you were to ask people, what is one of your fears, or what is a repetitive thought that you feel like is holding you back? We're going to be able to trace it back to things that our survival mechanism taught us then, but they don't really serve us now. So when these thoughts start to come through our mind, these thoughts that come from that survival instinct, we want to catch them. We want to observe them early before they control our behavior. Here's another kind of thought. Number 2, socialized thoughts. All of us have grown up in an environment that socializes us. This includes our family, our friends, our government, religion. Even if we're not identifying with a particular religion, if that religion has influenced your culture, it's going to influence you. All these different things. So if from a young age, somebody has taught you that taking risk is not worth it, or if somebody taught you something like scared money don't make money, these different things, you start to take on these little beliefs here and there that we were socialized to believe. And then when you go up against a challenge or you go to try something new, thoughts from that socialization are going to enter your mind and become that riptide. They're going to become the thing that carries you out. So one thing of our culture is that often we are rewarded for being bullies and punished for being the person who tries to make a difference. A great example of that is the person we nominated for president. Definitely a bully. So we are shown time and time again, you might notice in the cafeteria, that in the cafeteria, when you're with your peers, when we're young, we're shown that one of the best ways to make friends is to gather together by picking on somebody else. And that then if you try to stick up to your friends and say, hey, we shouldn't do that, you're then usually ostracized. So as little kids, we look at our bigger environment and we see this, and then we model it. We learn from a young age, it's not always good to stick up for people because you could get hurt. All these are different socialized thoughts. They influence what we eat, the times we decide to go for a risk or not, our relationships with money, with other people. All of these are socialized thoughts. And they influence us, especially in times of stress, indecision, in uncertainty, all these moments. Not only do our instinct, our survival thoughts kick in, but so do these socialized thoughts. And they become that riptide. So what we want to do is become observant of them, to notice, what are some repetitive socialized thoughts I have? Here's an example for me. is that I was taught when I was younger that unless you look like you're physically working, you're letting down your fellow employees, or you're not really working hard. So this one around work ethic was, I was taught, no matter what, always look like you're doing some form of physical labor, or else you're not really working hard. And so I was told, for instance, if there's nothing to do, just take out a broom and start sweeping, and sweep up a pile and just pretend like you're sweeping. Always look like you're working. This is what I was taught, which definitely has its place, except for a lot of the work that I do now revolves around like strategic thinking. And so if you watch somebody thinking, it pretty much looks like you're just sitting there. You know, like there's really no way to pretend that I'm thinking. Like, I guess I could like, scratch my head. But when you're planning or strategically thinking, or you're doing these different things, it's not the same as manual labor to show that you're working. And so I had this big internal conflict. I used to always feel like I'm not working hard enough. I'm not doing a good job. I'm letting down my team because I wasn't outwardly showing that I was working hard. And so I had to recognize, you know, this is a socialized thought. This is a belief I took on at a young age because of what I was taught. And now it's holding me back. And so I made the decision that I'm going to let that go. And so whenever it would come in, I wouldn't notice it all the way. I wouldn't notice it right away, but I would notice it in that I started to feel anxious, or I started to feel like I wasn't doing a good enough job. And I used to just automatically believe those thoughts until I started to become the observer. And when I started to feel those feelings of anxiousness, or like I wasn't doing a good enough job, before I believed them, I would stop myself and I would get out of there and I would start to observe the pattern of the thoughts. And I noticed, actually, this is that socialized thought. This isn't actually what I believe. This is just that thought pattern that continues to rear its head. And once I noticed it, once I became the observer, I could break the pattern. I could get out of that riptide. So think about that for your life. What are some socialized thoughts? What are some survival thoughts that continually come in your mind? Here's the last one I want to talk about. Number 3, somersault thoughts. Somersault thoughts are those times where our mind likes to chew on something like a dog's got a bone, right? Where we keep turning it over and over and over, head over heels, like a somersault. This is a word we have in the English language called ruminating. I'm ruminating on this. And ruminating comes from what animals with hooves do to their food, like a cow. So animals with hooves, naturally, we're very defenseless. Like a cow really can't do that much. That's why in the country they tip cows, because cows really can't defend themselves. So when they eat, when they put their head down to eat, it's a very vulnerable place to be. So instinctively or survivally, animals like that learn that they need to get their food into their mouth quick and move on. And so what animals do that ruminate is that they swallow their food without chewing, and then it goes into their stomach, and then they regurgitate the food, and then they swallow it, and they regurgitate it and swallow it, and it ruminates in their stomach. And so we do this too with thoughts. So go back to my example when I got the text from my coworkers that there was an emergency, but I had to put my phone on airplane mode, so there was nothing I could do about the emergency. I wanted to be able to control my situation so bad. And because there was nothing I could do, I started to give myself a false sense of control by ruminating, by taking one thought like, well, what if this happens? And then I'd be like, I don't know. So I'd swallow it, and then I'd regurgitate it. Yeah, but what if this happens? I don't know. And just taking the thought and chewing on it, somersaulting over and over and over again. And oftentimes we do somersault thinking, where we turn an idea over and over and over and over again with really no end goal in mind. We're doing it because we think that it is somehow a solution, that somehow it's us acting, us taking action, us doing something, rather than just sitting there in uncertainty, when in reality it's not. It's not taking action. It's not control. It's a coping mechanism for our discomfort of uncertainty, our discomfort that there's really nothing we can do in this moment. And so instead, we just think over and over and over again. And so when you notice yourself doing somersault thinking, it usually is when you're turning over a thought for its second or third time around, where you haven't made a decision, instead you're just thinking and thinking and thinking and turning. Well, what about this? Well, what if that happened? Well, what if they say this? Well, what if it does this? It can be helpful when strategizing or trying to create a plan to think of all the alternatives that happen. But that's a time where you're reflecting or you're being introspective. You're trying to think of what are the possibilities, or you're just, observing your thoughts. But we can tell the difference when we're being motivated by stress to think and think and think and think and think. You just feel it, right? So in those moments, as we've been saying, become the observer. Don't try to force them to stop. Step out of the riptide, become the observer, and break the pattern. So what I want to leave you with before we depart here in these last couple minutes is, what are some ways to break the patterns? So ways to break the patterns are the same ways we reinforce them. So right here I got for you 3 different ways, 3 pattern reinforcers. So we can either reinforce positive patterns or negative patterns. And there's 3 areas that we can do this quickly, okay? One area that is a pattern reinforcer, or one way where we can reinforce positive or negative patterns, is in our body. For instance, if I was to say to you, behind door number 1 is somebody who is super excited, they're feeling great, they think that life is a joy, what would you picture their body posture to be? They'd probably have their shoulders back, their chest up a little bit. They'd probably have a little smile on their face. They'd be relaxed. What about their breathing? They'd probably be breathing nice and, deep, and they'd be breathing fully. Okay, what about somebody who is feeling really anxious and fearful? What would you describe their body posture as? Probably the shoulders are slumped down, chest is down, their whole body is probably tight. Breathing is shallow and rapid. Their eyes are probably moving around really quickly. So what we're highlighting here is a knowledge that we already know, that there are certain patterns that we use in our body that reinforce certain emotions, certain behaviors. For instance, we go back to the stubbing the toe. You stub your toe, automatically your body goes into a, or somebody cuts you off, and what do? You death grip the steering wheel. You get your shoulders come up to your ears, right? So there's patterns that we all have in our body. So if we want to reinforce a positive pattern, let's say you see one of these 3 thoughts, a survival thought, a socializing thought, or a somersault thought. You notice it coming through, and you become the observer. If you want to get out of that pattern, a great thing to do is to do something with your body that moves you towards an energy level you're looking for. So we already talked about at the beginning of the podcast, a great place to start was with your breath. So it's just intentionally breathing in. We talk about in another episode different breathing strategies. One really good one is box breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, you hold that for 4 seconds, and then you breathe in. This is something that firefighters do, is this box breathing. So one way is just automatically to break your pattern is to do some breathing. Next is to do something with your body that moves you. Right? Have you ever heard somebody say, I'm going to go for a walk to clear my mind, or I went for a run and I got an idea? Doing something physically with your body that is positive can get you out of a thought pattern that is disempowering. Or if you check out Amy Cuddy's TED Talk on power poses, she talks about if you do a superhero pose where you put your fist in the air, or the pose like you just scored the world's biggest touchdown, or you just blew out your candles on a cake and all your best friends were around. If you do some sort of empowering pose like that for a couple minutes a day, she talks about that not only do we know this as people who are practitioners of these type of strategies, but scientifically it can change your body chemistry. So if you're feeling really angry right? And you're noticing, I don't want to feel this kind of anger. A lot of this anger is coming from these different socialized thoughts that make me feel like I'm not enough or I don't deserve love, or these survival instincts that make me want to go fight somebody. A great thing to do is to check in. Where are my shoulders at, right? Release them down. You automatically calm your chemical reactions in your body. Start breathing in deeply through your nose and out through your mouth. And then do something with your body. Have some sort of move that you do. It can be you put your arms in the air like you just scored a touchdown. You're like, yay! Might feel goofy at first, but it works. Why do so many people recommend this? Because it works. Doing something with your body. Just going for a little run in place. Different things like that. They will shift your energy level that you're at. Okay, what is a second one? What is a second reinforcer? That is our words. Our words will reinforce a positive or a negative state of energy. For instance, if we were looking at a sunset and there was these orange and red colors, and you saw some like birds just flying into the sunset and a cool breeze coming across your face, and I turned to you and said, "It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. I have seen better." How would that shift that moment for you? It'd be much different than if I were to say, you know, it's moments like this that make me feel so grateful for life. Totally different energy level. And I make a joke like this, but the other day I was walking at my sister's house and I was going through her neighborhood, and it was just a great day. The sun was out and there was these big oak trees and it was awesome, but there was no sidewalk. I had to walk in the middle of the road. So I started to say to myself, you know, this is a nice neighborhood, but my neighborhood's better. And I caught myself. I became the observer and I realized, what the heck am I saying? How can I be saying that my neighborhood's better? Like, this is amazing. And I instantly started to shift the moment by concentrating on my words. And I said instead, actually, this is beautiful. This is wonderful. This is amazing. And using those words shifted the meaning rather than that repetitive thought always saying, well, there's something better somewhere else, right? So in those moments where you want to get out of that riptide of your emotions, you want to get out and you become the observer, great way to change the pattern is first do something with your body, breathe in, breathe out, do something, have some sort of move, and then start to use words that instead of exaggerating the circumstances, bring you back to the center. For instance, I often, when I'm upset, I use the word so to exaggerate things. I was so mad, and that person he was so mean, and oh my God, you know, things like that. So instead of doing that, then I start to use different words that instead create a different meaning. So instead of saying, it was the worst thing ever, it can say, it was inconvenient, right? Inconvenient has a different emotional message than the worst thing ever, right? So our body and our words can reinforce in a positive or a negative way. The last one, our attention. Where I decide to place my attention in a given circumstance can have a totally different outcome. For instance, if something happens, right, where I was walking down the street at my sister's, I placed my attention on how there was no sidewalks for me to walk, rather than the fact that this is an amazing opportunity to just be out in the sun and to have this great breeze. And so initially my mind wanted to make the decision to focus on what I didn't have rather than what I do have. And so many times when we're feeling upset, when our thoughts are controlling us rather than us getting to control who we are as a whole, it's because of our decision on where we're placing our attention. Usually we're placing our attention on something we don't have or some sort of scarcity rather than having a gratitude state of mind, which you know I'm a big fan of. So combining these three, when you become the observer and you notice that one of these repetitive thoughts or one of these thought patterns that aren't serving you, that are thought patterns that you're trying to overcome because they're holding you back, first, rather than just trying to force them out of there, going against them like the riptide, Come out and become the observer. Notice that they're happening and that they're hijacking, that they're overcoming your body, and that you're identifying with the thought. And instead observe it. Become a neutral observer. And then break the pattern with your body. Check in on your breathing. Find out where your shoulder levels are at. Find out if you're clenching your fist or your toes or you're doing something like that. And just start to move. Maybe run in place, or I have my move where I go, boo, like that. Okay, have some sort of move that becomes a positive trigger for you. And then check in on your words. What words are you using that are associated with this repetitive thought that is no longer serving? And use different words. Use some sort of word that'll help you shift your energy towards where you're trying to go. And lastly, check in on where you're placing your attention. And try to shift it from something that's lacking or something that's missing to something that is bringing you gratitude. Something that is an opportunity for growth, right? So instead of when a challenge comes, one way I could place my attention is saying, all the time, bad things are always happening to me. It just seems like I can never catch a break. Okay, that's attention and words. And if you could see me, you'd notice my body language. I was tensing my neck. I was scrunching my face. Instead, I could place my attention and say, you know, every time a challenge comes, it seems like I always come out the other side so much more capable of handling anything. That obstacles are just a way for me to prove the awesomeness that I am, right? Instead of placing my attention on, this always happens to me and it's terrible, seeing this is an opportunity. So we covered a lot in these 36 minutes today, folks, and I appreciate you going with me through this. And, you know, if you want any of these handouts that I have, just send me an email and I can send them to you. Or better yet, you can go to tomearl.com/think, THINK. You can sign up there right there with your email and they'll automatically go to you. So feel free to check those out. Let me know if you have any questions. You can always catch me at TomRealArtist or tomearl.com. My friends, as always, I'm wishing you peace and blessings. Thank you. One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching.